Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Tracy with JDL Threads and thank you for joining me today. To anyone who's here for the first time, welcome, and any returning viewers, welcome back. And what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be making some hats on our RICOMA MT1501. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So supplies we're going to need, of course, is a hat, and then we're also going to be using just some tearaway stabilizer that we're going to put on the inside of the hat on our cap frame to get that embroidered out on our RICOMA MT1501. So come on over to my cap frame station and I'll show you guys how to get that set up. Again, thanks for joining me, and if you enjoy my videos, like, share, and subscribe for me so we can get those videos out. All right, everybody, so as you can see, we are over at the cap framing station where I have my cap frame hooked onto my craft table, and all we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of tearaway stabilizer that I did get from Amazon, and I got a big roll here from Amazon just for caps so I wouldn't have to pre-cut anything, and I'll try to get that description below for you guys, so if you want to check that out. So pretty much all we do is we're going to take our cutaway stabilizer and we're going to put it under this tab here, this tab right here, and then we're just going to open up our cap and we're going to let our sweatband out because we don't want to sew that down, so we're just going to pull it out. I'm just going to unsnap the bag. Then all we're going to do is we are going to just go ahead and put our sweatband right on top of our cutaway stabilizer and underneath this little tab here, right underneath that tab on top of our stabilizer. And I usually like to just try to turn my hat to the left just a little bit, because once we go to secure it in, it is going to turn to the right so that we can get this center crease lined up with the line that I have here on top of the cap frame. So it's over to the left just a bit. Got it where I think I want it. And we're just going to take this piece here, and we're going to just bring it around, and we're going to try to get it all the way to the bottom of our cap down here to get our cap in real secure. And you might want to just pull your cap down really good all the way down so you can keep the cap nice and flat on both sides before you go to lock it in. Right, so I'm going to try to pull it on down on this right side as well. I'm going to clip it in. And that looks to me like it's too much, a little bit to the right too much. So I'm going to unclip it and push it back to the left and try it one more time, you guys. All right, and that looks perfect. And now you see how you have your line all the way down at the bottom. And we're just gonna snap our cap out so you can see that the cap is secured really close to the brim down there, if you can see that, you guys. All right, so now we're gonna head over to the embroidery machine and we're gonna get it snapped in. All right, guys, so we are over at the RICOMA MT1501, and we're going to go ahead and just put in our cap into our frame. We're going to turn it to the left like so, and then we're going to slide it back to the right so that it can click into those tabs. Then all we're going to do is we're going to push in our hat frame. Let me take that out and show you. So you have these tabs here. And you have two on top and one on the bottom, and you're going to want to make sure that you get all those clicked in to make sure your hat stitches out and it doesn't show any registration issues. So you're just going to push it in. You're going to hear that click. You're going to test each one of your tabs. Make sure they're nice and clicked in. You don't want them moving up and down. You want them to be stiff. So let me take that out one more time and show you guys. When you put your cap in, you don't want your tabs to be moving like this. Once you click your cap in, you want it to be where it doesn't move so that we can get a good stitch out. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to put those in. We're going to make sure that we have all the tabs in and our tabs are not moving. That one down there is moving. All right, and we are ready to stitch out. They're securely. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this just over just a little bit so it hits the front of that crease of the cap. And we are ready to go. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. Here we go.
Tighter, you guys, and put my clip in here, which I didn't do on the other side, and it had a little wrinkle. That's okay. I'm just gonna pull it
Okay, everybody, and with that, the design is all done. So let me go ahead and just cut my jump stitches, and I'm going to show you guys what it looks like. All right, everybody, and let me just show you how amazing this hat came out for my son's father. Look at that, you guys. Just came out so amazing. And it says, "Those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day. And he knows why." And I want to say, Happy Father's Day, David. You're an amazing dad. And I made this just for you. All right, guys. So again, my name is Tracy with JDL Threads. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. And remember to like, share, and subscribe for me. And I will see you guys in the next video.